There was a time when humanity looked up at the stars and dreamed of reaching them. Then the earth stopped letting us dream. The crops began to fail. First the okra, then the wheat, then almost everything else. Dust storms rolled across the plains like slow, patient armies, swallowing farms, filling lungs, burying the idea that tomorrow would be better than today. The world was not ending with fire or flood. It was ending quietly, with hunger. In this world lived a man named Cooper, a former NASA pilot, grounded not by age or injury, but by a civilization that had decided it no longer needed people who looked upward. The world needed farmers now. So Cooper farmed. He raised his 2 children in a wooden house on the edge of those fields, under skies that were more dust than blue. His daughter, Murph, was 10 years old and absolutely certain that something lived in her bedroom. Not something dangerous, something communicating. Books falling from shelves in patterns. Dust on the floor arranged into lines she couldn't explain. She called it a ghost. Cooper was a scientist at heart. He called it interesting. One night, the dust settled into a pattern on Murph's floor that looked like coordinates. Cooper recognized them immediately. Numbers, a location. Someone or something had drawn a map in the dust of a dying world, and it pointed to a place hidden in the mountains not far from their home. They found it in the dark, a facility buried underground, running on generators, staffed by people who had never stopped looking upward. What remained of NASA? Working in secret because a world focused on survival had no patience for exploration. And there, Cooper learned the truth. A wormhole had appeared near Saturn, a tunnel through space, placed there by some intelligence far beyond human understanding. On the other side were 12 planets that might support human life. 12 chances to save the species. Astronauts had already gone through years earlier. One for each world. They had sent back signals, faint, fragile signals across impossible distances that said, "We found something. Come." Cooper was asked to fly the mission, to go through the wormhole, to find which world could become home, and then, if everything went right, to come back. The hardest part is not the wormhole, or the unknown planets, or the possibility of never returning. The hardest part was his daughter's face when he told her he was leaving. Murph did not cry. She was angrier than that. She stood in her room and she told him not to go. And when he went anyway, she refused to say goodbye. Cooper sat in his truck at the end of the driveway for a long moment, looking back at the house. Then he drove toward the stars. He told himself he would come back. He told himself she would understand one day. He held on to those 2 things as the rocket carried him away from the only world he had ever known. passing through the wormhole was like nothing human language had been built to describe. Space folded, light bent. And then, on the other side, an alien solar system opened up before them, orbiting a black hole so massive it had its own name, Gargantua. A darkness so deep it pulled light itself into silence. They found the first world close to the black hole, a planet covered entirely by a shallow, endless ocean, beautiful from a distance, deadly in its detail. Because orbiting so near to Gargantua meant that time moved differently there. 1 hour on that world equaled 7 years back on Earth. They landed anyway. They had to know. And while they searched the waterlogged surface for signs of life, the clock on Earth kept turning. 7 years passing in the span of a single afternoon. When they returned to their ship, the messages were waiting. Years of them. Birthdays and harvests, and quiet, ordinary days. All compressed into a folder of videos that Cooper could barely bring himself to open. His son, grown. His daughter, grown. And in her eyes, something that looked terribly like the feeling of being left behind. There is a theory that love is not merely an emotion, that it is something with weight and dimension, something that can reach across space and time in ways that physics cannot yet measure. Cooper did not know if he believed it as a scientist, but as a father, drifting between stars, watching his daughter age in small rectangles of light on a screen. He felt it with absolute certainty. She was still there, and he was still going. Not away from her, towards something that might one day let him find his way back. The universe is under no obligation to make sense to us. But sometimes, in the dark, with the rain falling and the fire burning low, it feels like the distance between people who love each other is the one distance that was never meant to be permanent. There were 3 worlds to check. 3 signals from 3 astronauts who had gone ahead of them years before, each carrying the hope of an entire species on their backs. The ocean world had taken everything they gave it and returned almost nothing. So they moved on. The second signal came from a man named Man, a brilliant scientist, perhaps the best among all who had been sent through the wormhole. His world registered as promising, habitable, worth the journey. And so they aimed the ship toward it and began the long drift through the dark. While they traveled, Cooper watched more messages from home. His daughter Murph had grown into a scientist herself, following in the footsteps of the man who had left her. She was working at NASA now, under the same professor who had sent Cooper through the wormhole, working on the same impossible equation that might one day allow humanity to lift itself off a dying planet. She had not forgiven him, not entirely, but she was doing the work. And perhaps, Cooper thought, that was its own kind of love. To keep going in the direction someone pointed you, even after they were gone. Mon's world was extraordinary to look at. Vast sheets of frozen cloud had solidified in the upper atmosphere over thousands of years, forming cliffs and plains and mountains made entirely of ice that floated above a dark and featureless surface below. It was alien and silent and strangely beautiful, like standing inside a dream that hadn't decided yet whether it was a good one or a bad one. Man himself was alive, barely. He had been alone on that world for years longer than any human being was designed to endure. Waiting, recording data, surviving on nothing but the faint hope that someone would eventually come. When they reached him, he wept. Not quietly. The way people weep when they've stopped believing rescue is possible, and then it arrives anyway. He told them the planet was viable. He told them the data was good. He told them humanity could survive here. He was lying. Loneliness is a patient, thorough thing. Given enough time and silence, it can reshape a person entirely, rearrange their values and their courage and their relationship with the truth, until what remains is something that looks like a human being, but is really just a creature trying to go home by any means necessary. Man had falsified his data. The planet was not habitable. It never had been. But to admit that would mean accepting that no rescue was coming, that he would die alone in a frozen sky at the edge of the universe. And that was something his mind simply refused to do. He attacked Cooper on the ice, left him for dead in a crevasse in the frozen clouds, took the ship, and tried to reach the space station orbiting above to force his way home through sheer, desperate will. What followed was not a victory. It was a tragedy. Mon had been one of the best of them, chosen for exactly the qualities that the isolation had slowly destroyed. The docking maneuver he attempted was violent and wrong, and the resulting explosion killed him instantly, damaged the station, and left Cooper's remaining crew scrambling in a crippled ship with dwindling options. They had one option left. One signal from one remaining astronaut, a woman named Edmonds, on a world they had not yet reached. But the ship was damaged. The fuel was almost gone. The mathematics of space travel are unforgiving. You cannot simply decide to go somewhere. Every trajectory must be earned, must be calculated, must be paid for with something. What they had left was the gravity of the black hole itself. Gargantua, the enormous dark at the center of this alien solar system. If they flew close enough to use its gravity as a slingshot, they could reach Edmund's world. But close enough to Gargantua meant more time dilation, more years lost, more distance opened between Cooper and his daughter. And there was something else. Something Cooper had been turning over in his mind since the ice planet. The mission had two plans. Plan A, solve the equation, build the launch platforms on Earth, save the population. Plan B, carry a bank of frozen embryos to a new world and begin humanity again from nothing, leaving behind everyone currently alive. He had begun to suspect that the man who sent him had always known Plan A was impossible, that the equation could not be solved without data that could only come from inside a black hole, that humanity was always going to Plan B. And Cooper had been sent through the wormhole not to save his children, but to ensure the species continued without them. He did not say this out loud. He kept it in the dark part of himself where fathers keep the things they are not ready to believe. They plotted the course. They aimed for Gargantua. And they flew. Here is what a black hole looks like up close, in case you have ever wondered. It does not look like darkness. Not exactly. It looks like an absence, a perfect circle of nothing surrounded by a ring of light so bright and so distorted by gravity that it bends completely around the void, forming a halo that is somehow both the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing the human eye has ever encountered. Light that has been traveling for millions of years, pulled into a curve, forced to orbit something it can never escape. Gargantua pulled at them as they flew past, pulled at the ship, pulled at time itself. Cooper made a decision. To reach Edmonds' world, they needed to shed weight. To shed weight meant releasing part of the ship, and Cooper chose to be the part that was released. He detached his module from the main vessel, aimed himself at the black hole, and told the others to go. To reach Edmonds' world. To start again. To carry humanity forward. His co-pilot, Brand, tried to argue. There was no time for arguments. Cooper fell toward Gargantua alone. And here is where the story stops being a science fiction film and becomes something else entirely. Something harder to name. Because he did not die. Not immediately. Not the way physics suggests he should have. He crossed the event horizon, the boundary beyond which nothing returns. And instead of being destroyed, he found himself inside something that had been built for him. Or perhaps built by him. Or perhaps built by something that understood that love, unlike light, does not behave the way the equations predict. Inside the black hole was a library. Not a library exactly, but that is the closest word for it. A vast and impossible structure built from the bookshelves of a child's bedroom. Infinite versions of the same small room, stretching in every direction, each one a different moment in time. Past and present and future arranged like books on shelves, and all accessible, all visible, all reachable if you knew how to reach them. Cooper understood immediately. He was inside a tesseract, a structure existing in 5 dimensions, built by beings who had evolved beyond the limitations of 3-dimensional space, and learned to move through time the way we move through rooms. Beings who had placed the wormhole near Saturn. Beings who had been trying for longer than human civilization had existed to send a message backward through time. And the message needed a messenger. Someone on the other side of the bookshelf. Someone with a reason to listen. Someone who would spend their whole life wondering why the books kept falling. Murph. His daughter had been right all along. There was something in her room, and it was him. It had always been him, reaching backward through time from inside a black hole, desperate to give her what she needed to save the world he could no longer reach himself. He found the moment, the morning he left. She was 10 years old, standing in her bedroom, watching the dust settle into patterns on the floor. He was there, invisible, 5-dimensional, separated from her by the thinnest membrane of time. And he could not hold her, could not speak to her, could not tell her that he was sorry, or that he loved her, or that everything he did was for her. All he could do was move the dust. He focused everything he had, every last piece of himself, and he sent her coordinates. The location of NASA, the beginning of the path that would bring him to this moment. He had always thought he was her father, sending her toward her destiny. He understood now that she was his, sending him toward his. But coordinates were not enough. Murph was a grown woman now, a scientist at NASA, working on the equation that had defeated every brilliant mind that had attempted it. The equation needed one more thing: data from inside a black hole, quantum data, the information that lived at the heart of Gargantua and could not be transmitted through any ordinary means. Cooper had that data. TARS, the robot who had gone into the black hole alongside him, had collected it as they fell. Raw, precise, impossible information about the nature of gravity itself. But how do you send data from inside a black hole to a woman on a dying planet, across an ocean of time and space? You find something she kept, something she carries, something with hands that move in a regular, measurable rhythm. A clock built to track the one thing the tesseract had taught him to navigate. He had given her a watch before he left. A simple thing. She had thrown it at him in anger, and he had placed it on her bookshelf, and she had kept it without ever quite deciding why. Cooper encoded the data into the movement of the second hand, not the numbers on the face, the tiny, invisible stutters and variations in the sweep of the hand as it moved. A message written in the language of time, left inside an object she had kept for decades without knowing why she couldn't bring herself to let it go. And then the tesseract began to close. The beings who had built it had gotten what they needed. The loop completed, the message delivered, the data sent. Cooper felt himself contracting, and the infinite library collapsing around him, the 5 dimensions folded back into the familiar 3. His last thought, before the darkness took him, was of his daughter's face, 10 years old, standing in her bedroom, the dust settling around her feet. He hoped she had kept the watch. She had kept the watch. Murph was older now, old enough to have lived most of a life in the years her father had spent crossing the universe. Old enough to have made peace, mostly, with the fact that he was gone. Old enough to have almost stopped believing he was coming back. But she was still working on the equation, still sitting with the same impossible problem that had occupied her entire adult life. And on the day that everything changed, she was sitting in her childhood bedroom, her father's old farm, now threatened by the same dust storms that had been threatening it since she was a girl, when she noticed something she had seen 1,000 times before, but never truly looked at. The second hand on the watch her father had left her was moving strangely, not broken, not random, patterned, deliberate, encoded. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands, closed her eyes, and listened to it with the way her father had taught her to listen to things she didn't understand, patiently, without expectations, the way a scientist approaches the unknown. And then she understood. The equation broke open. 20 years of dead ends and false starts and brilliant failure dissolved in a single afternoon, as the data encoded in the sweep of that second hand gave her everything she needed. Gravity. Solved. Not theorized. Solved. Completely and practically, and in a way that could be built and tested and used to lift entire cities off the surface of a dying world. She sat very still for a long moment after she understood it. The dust moved outside the window. The farm was quiet. And Murph, Dr. Murphy Cooper, the woman who saved humanity, allowed herself, just for a moment, to feel the presence of her father in the room. He had been there all along, knocking books off shelves, stirring the dust, writing her a message in the hands of a clock she had almost thrown away. She had always known. Cooper woke up floating, not in the tesseract, not in the black hole, not in the darkness between stars. He was in a bed, in a room with soft light and the faint hum of machinery. And outside the window, there was no dying earth and no alien sky. There was a space station, enormous and elegant, spinning slowly against the black, its curved corridors filled with people and light, and the ordinary sounds of a civilization that had refused to end. Families walking, children running, the smell of something being cooked somewhere down the hall. They had found him drifting near Saturn, ejected from the black hole in a way that physics could not explain, and that no one had attempted to explain too carefully, because some gifts are best received without too many questions. He had been unconscious for a long time, long enough for the world to change completely. Murph's equation had worked. The launch platforms had been built. Thousands of people, then tens of thousands, then more, had lifted off the surface of the earth that was killing them and come here, to these stations hanging in the dark between worlds, beginning the long, patient work of finding somewhere new to call home. The earth they had left behind was empty now, or nearly so. The dust still moved across the plains. The crops that remained still struggled. But humanity was no longer on it, not most of humanity. Humanity was up here in the dark, heading somewhere better. Cooper lay in the hospital bed, and looked out the window for a very long time. He was 124 years old, technically, if you counted the years that had passed on Earth while he moved through time at different speeds. He did not feel it. He felt like a man who had been gone a long time and needed, more than anything, to see his daughter. They brought him to her in a room full of quiet light. She was very old, surrounded by the people she had spent her life loving, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, gathered around a woman they all knew had done something no one else had ever done. Saved the species, solved the unsolvable, carried the weight of the future on a set of shoulders that had learned, young, how to carry things alone. She was dying, not from illness or injury, simply from age, the gentle, inevitable arithmetic of a life fully lived. She had been waiting for him. They had told her they found him, and she had asked them to bring him. And then she had kept breathing, kept holding on, because there was one thing left to do before she let herself rest. Cooper sat beside her bed and took her hand, the same hand he had held when she was 10 years old. Standing in a dusty bedroom, watching books fall from shelves she didn't understand yet. She looked at him. He looked at her. And all the years between them, all the time dilation and the black holes and the dying earth and the impossible equations and the watch that she had almost thrown away. All of it folded quietly into a single moment between a father and his daughter. She told him he had to go, that she had a room full of people who had lived whole lives because of her, and that she was ready, that she had been ready for a while, and that he should not sit here watching her go when there was a whole universe left to explore. She told him to find Brand, his co-pilot, the woman who had made it to Edmonds's world and was even now beginning the work of making it habitable for the thousands of people who would eventually follow. She told him she had always known he would come back. And then Cooper held his daughter's hand in the soft light of a spinning space station somewhere between the stars. And he let himself cry for the first time in a very long time. And she smiled at him with the particular patience of someone who has long since made their peace with the shape of their life. And she let go. ship, a small one, loaded with enough supplies for a long journey and one robot companion who had been with him at the edge of everything and back. He pointed it toward Edmonds's world, toward Brand, who was out there somewhere in the dark, working quietly and patiently on the first day of humanity's next chapter, not knowing yet that the man who had fallen into a black hole and come out the other side was on his way. As he left the station behind and the dark opened up around him, Cooper thought about the things that stay constant regardless of how far you travel or how many years bend themselves out of shape around you. The things that gravity cannot account for, and physics cannot measure, and equations cannot contain. The look on his daughter's face when she was 10 years old, standing in the dust, certain there was something in her room worth listening to. She had been right. She was almost always right. He should have told her that more often. The stars moved past the window slowly. The ship hummed. Space, as it tends to do, offered no commentary on any of this. Simply continued in all directions, patient and indifferent and vast, beyond any human attempt to measure it. Cooper set the course, leaned back, and for the first time in longer than he could accurately calculate, he felt something that was close enough to peace that he decided not to examine it too carefully. He was going somewhere. Someone was waiting. The universe, against all reasonable expectations, had not yet finished with him. That was enough. And so the story ends the way all the best ones do. Not with resolution exactly, but with direction. With someone moving toward something. With the quiet stubborn insistence that the distance between people who love each other is a problem worth solving, regardless of how many dimensions stand between them. We are all, in our own small ways, falling towards something we don't fully understand, leaving people behind that we didn't want to leave, sending messages through the only materials we have available, the things we say, the things we build, the hands of clocks we give to the people we hope will keep them. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, those messages arrive exactly when they were needed, decoded by someone who was always going to be the one to decode them, in a room they always felt was trying to tell them something. Let that thought carry you now. Wherever the people you love are tonight, whatever distances have opened between you, they are reachable in ways that have not been invented yet. The rain is still falling. The thunder is far away and moving further. The dark outside is the same dark that holds the stars. You are safe in here. You are warm. And wherever you are going when you close your eyes tonight, I hope it is somewhere good. Sleep well.